What has this 5-year pursuit taught you about dreams, making them happen, setbacks, coming back again? What has it taught you about a journey of seeing something evolve and come to life?
Sure. Do you want me to take that?
Yeah,
Sure. All of my major projects, I know going in will take years. So for instance, when I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, which was my first book, that took 5 years, from the month I started to the month the book came out. The book has been in print for over 30 years now. And when I was writing it, someone said to me, well, when are you going to be done? And I said, I'll be done when it's right. And because I took the time to make it right, it stood the test of time, it lasted. The book I just wrote with Guillermo del Toro took me 4 years. And during all these periods, I'm working on multiple projects. I like to multitask. I like to do many things at once. My new Space Command would be a massive project. The first 2 hour story has 1,900 visual effects shots. That's more than Star Wars. And a big episode of Battlestar Galactica would have 200 visual effects shots. This has 1,900 in the first 2 hours. So I knew that it would be incredibly ambitious. And but the steps in Space Command were raise the money to get the thing going, continue to raise money by selling shares, shoot the first 2 hours, and then lock down a powerful agency that then gives me the credibility to go and pitch the networks and sell the show. And so all of those things are very time-consuming, and it's like a military campaign. So I knew it would take years, but we're further along. We're closer to being toward the finish line than toward the beginning, because we've shot, 2 hours we've shot the entire first story. We've shot 30 minutes of the second story, and now I'm pitching the series. And whoever buys it will have to pick up the first season, and that's 12 episodes. And we're getting a very good response. But it comes from putting in the work, because now we can say, this is what this is what it looks like, here it is, here's the thing itself. And that's a great experience.
There's a truism about almost any television show or film where everybody at the end said, if I'd known it had been this hard, I never would have started it. But once you're in it, you can't turn around. Then they jump into another project, as though they had no memory of what had just happened.
Right.
So I think, some of it is kind of a wild horse, but when you're on, you're not too eager to let go.
But there are twists and turns, and there are disappointments, and certain things you can't foresee. For instance, we brought aboard, there was a visual effects genius that I'd worked with many times in my career. He won an Emmy for Star Trek Voyager. He designed Babylon 5 and reinvented television, how visual effects were done in television. And he did the Star Trek episode that I did with Elaine and I did with George Takei, that we did a few years ago, that got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula Awards. So I brought him aboard Space Command, and he fell ill and sadly died. His name was Ron Thornton, and he was a genius. But sadly, he didn't get to see us through to the finish line, and that's just what life does sometimes. You never know. He was like 59. It's very sad. And so, but again, you just try stuff.
For anyone who wants to produce, I'm more producer than Marc. Marc is,
Elaine's better and wiser than me in every way.
No, I'm a detail person. But I always say, the thing is that some people feel things are going awry, that they're not producing well, that's just what happens. That's being a producer. So I try sort of seeing producing anything is like it's a spinning ball.
Right.
It's spinning very quickly, and things are flying off into space. And your job as a producer is to tack back things as quickly as you can, and always make the assumption that the thing you're going to tack back on will be better than the thing that's whirled off into space. And you're not doing anything wrong. That's just the nature of production.
Right.
And if you have that headset and you're not like beating yourself up, you're just moving as fast as you can and keeping your eye on the ball, you'll be a much happier producer.
Right. And also, again, Elaine, it's funny because Elaine and I have been together for 40 years and married for 39, and have worked together so much, people assume we're very similar. But in reality, we're very, very different. Elaine, for one, is sane. but seriously, she's calmer than I am. I'm a worrier. My head is very, very busy. I beat myself up a lot. But I'm the one with the big vision. I'm the one who, I'll take on something that's crazily big. For instance, when I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, I started that book 2 years after Rod Serling died. And I had graduated from UCLA with a degree in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts. I had sold one short story. I had never sold an article. I had never taken a journalism class. And I decided I was going to write a book about the Twilight Zone. Now, I had already heard that Carol Serling, Rod's widow, had turned down major journalists. So if I had asked 100 people what my chance of getting Rod Serling's widow to let me do a book about the Twilight Zone was, 100 people would have said, you have no chance. I was 22 years old. but it's not a majority opinion. Your fate is not a majority opinion. You outvote the world if you decide you're going to do something. And so then it just became strategic. It's like, how do I go about doing this? So what I did was, I had met one writer from the Twilight Zone, George Clayton Johnson. I met him when I was 16 years old at a science fiction convention, and we became friends. So I interviewed him about the Twilight Zone. He connected me up with 2 other people who worked on the show, and I interviewed them. And over a 3-month period, I interviewed 30 people who had worked on the show. Then I went to Carol Serling. And by then, I knew a lot about the show. And I felt very confident that I could do this book. And so I went to her house. It was Rod's house. It was exactly as Rod had left it. His Emmys were there, 6 Emmys. There was one room just for the trophies. And so 6 Emmys, 3 Hugos, the Peabody Award, all that stuff. His dog was still there, the senile Irish setter. His office was intact, exactly as he'd left it. And I remember standing in this huge living room with Carol Serling sitting on the couch, and for some reason I was standing, and I told her what I had in mind. And I could envision that future of my completing the book successfully as clearly as I see you. And I spoke very convincingly, and I knew what I was talking about because I'd done my research. And she talked to some of the people I'd interviewed and the people she knew and trusted, and they clearly gave me a good bill of health, a good report, because she came back and she said, okay, you've got full access to everything. And so I spent several years crawling through Rod's attic, and in his garage there were the 16mm film prints in these big film cans of the Twilight Zone episodes. And I would take home a stack like this and put them on the projector. They had the original commercials, the coming attraction spots. Some of these prints had never even been through a projector. And I wrote the book. And but it was a crazily ambitious project, as is Space Command. And I actually enjoy big challenges.
But you had rolled enough in time as a test run.
Yeah, well, that was another crazy thing to do. It was, that was sort of the test run. As Elaine said, it was basically, I was at a science fiction convention, and this is just when Star Trek and when Enterprise was kind of fading, it was dying down, the fans hadn't really embraced it, and this is before J.J. Abrams said he was going to do the Star Trek movie. And so I was on a panel for Star Trek, because I wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and someone from the audience said, well, what's the future of Star Trek? And Walter Koenig, who had played Chekhov, gave this answer, and it was a crazy answer, and it was so crazy that afterwards I said, tell me all about this. And I talked to him for about an hour, and he told me that there were a group of fans in upstate New York who had built a full-size copy of all the original Star Trek sets from the blueprints, and they were shooting their own Star Trek episodes and putting them online, and they were getting a larger audience than Enterprise was getting on UPN. And he was about to fly to New York and be in an episode starring himself as Chekhov and written by Dorothy Fontana, who had written and story edited the original Star Trek series. So that night I went online, and they had an episode of that they had done, which was a sequel to an episode the original Star Trek had done called The Doomsday Machine, and it had William Wyndham, who'd been in the guest star in that episode, and it was great fun. And so a friend of mine years ago had come up with a great Sulu episode. They were going to bring Star Trek back in the 70s, Paramount was. And then Star Wars came out, and after a year of development, they made the movie instead of the series they'd been developing. And so my friend had pitched to them a great Star Trek episode starring Sulu, and it didn't get made. And both he and I had written for Star Trek The Next Generation. He was an Emmy winner, and I called him and I said, you want to write this episode? He said, sure. The 2 of us. And so I called the boys in upstate New York, and I said, hey, we want to do this Sulu episode, and I'd want to direct it, because I'd always wanted to direct. And they said, sure. And I said, but we have to shoot high def. They'd been shooting mini DV. And they said, yeah, well, if you can get the cameras. And I said, okay. And then I went to George Takei, and I sat in his kitchen, his living room, actually, dining room. And I gave him, I typed up a 3-page outline of what the story would be. And I said, you never got the great Sulu episode you deserved. This is it. I need you to tell me if you'll do it. So he sat there and he read the 3 pages, and he said, I'm in. So we spent 6 months building our production team. We shot 9 days in upstate New York on the Enterprise sets. We built Sulu's ship, what's it called? The Sulu ship, the Excelsior? Yes, it's the Excelsior. So we built Sulu's ship, the Excelsior, here in LA. So we shot 2 days here in LA, and 1 day in Florida with the effects team. It was a solid year of post-production, 700 visual effects shots. It's called Star Trek World Enough in Time. You can actually watch it on my website, marczicree.com, in its entirety. And it got nominated for the Hugo and Nebula, which are the 2 top awards in science fiction. First time any independent project had ever been nominated for those awards. We did it without a studio or a network. We did it for under $100,000. And it looked as good as any network show you'd ever see. And I showed it, I said to George when we were shooting, a year from now, you and I will be at the World Science Fiction Convention in Japan. We'll be showing this to an audience of several thousand people. And at the end, we'll answer questions. I'll be speaking in English, you'll be speaking in Japanese because he's fluent. And I said, a year later, we'll be nominated for the Hugo. And all of that stuff came true. And when we showed it in Japan, there was 3,000 people in the audience, and we got a standing ovation. People were in tears at the end because it was so moving. And so, you know, so I had that vision. I was speaking a future that I made happen. And but the fact that I was able to do that without a studio or a network showed that I could create something without that infrastructure. And that showed me that I could do Space Command, and that gave me the credibility to pull it off.
Oh, that all sounds so smooth in the telling. There were quite a few bumpy bits as we were doing this.
Yes.
The team got very worried about high def, the initial team, because they were very worried that it would show a multitude of flaws in their sets, which it did not. I mean, their sets were beautiful, yeah. But there was a lot of concern about high def, which they then used from then on. But there were many, and the acting of the initial team who had put it together, they were fans. Right. They needed a little bit of polishing for some of them. Some of them were pros, some of them were not. And they were good enough to be enthusiastic about actor camp, which we set up. So we had an actor camp, but there were a lot of little...
Well, we rehearsed with them. We did improv. We wanted to see who had the strongest acting chops of the actors.
And they were very open to learning. So that the one who was playing Captain Kirk, the fellow who was playing Captain Kirk, who was okay, he was fine, you know. But at one point he was like really eager. He was working, and he got applauded after one scene that he had done. And then he was really, you know, with the learning curve. So. But there was a lot of tension, you know, people were being pressed to come to a really high level, and that's where I was, you know, my job was being the HHDH, which was the hothead dehotifier, when people were starting to get a little bit tense.
Well, it can get very intense on a shoot.
It can, and he was just driving it. So it was, and the final day, you should talk about George Takei on that final day.
Well, he was just amazing. We shot a very, very long day. And the last take he did was one take, and it was perfect. And
how many hours was that?
20,
like a 20-hour day.
Crazy.
And he was up there.
Phenomenal.
After a 20-hour day, never a complaint.
Yeah.
And
he'd spent months lifting weights and getting in shape. He lost 15 pounds to do the role.
And he wasn't in bad shape.
No.
He got into great shape. And then he was
phenomenal.
on cue after like a 20-hour day. He was standing on that stage.
On the transporter.
On the transporter stage with a single tear tracking down his face exactly on cue.
Well, that was appropriate to the scene. It wasn't that he was crying because he'd been working for 20 years.
No, it was on cue. He was just phenomenal. So there was a tremendous pressure. So I mean, there are a lot of stories, but so it wasn't easy. It's never easy.
You have to be crazily driven.
Yes.
You have to just be the engine that doesn't stop, and that's when you have a calling. That's when you, I mean, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, if you're doing it because you want to prove something to your parents, or you want to, you know, as I said, make a lot of money, or you want to just kind of do crap work and have that somehow slide by, those are all the wrong reasons. You know, there's a friend of mine, his name's Frank Spotnitz. He was executive producer of The X-Files. He created and ran Man in the High Castle, and he's got 4 shows on the air right now. And he said, good enough is never good enough. And I absolutely believe that.
But with these fans, they were like really driven. They were doing it out of love. And even if they get angry at each other, you know, there's never enough time, there's never enough resources. You're always trying to protect your department against other departments, because you're trying to do your best job. But they're still, for all of the tensions, they were a delight to work with because they were doing what they loved.
Mm-hmm.